and now he's running out of options, and all these factors are converging. All they're converging. And they're converging on 1 week, 1 day. And that arrives. His father's in the hospital. There's a confrontation with Jeannie. Alec tells her, manages to ward off the conversation by saying Mr. Randolph is terminal. He, of course, denies that, so I guess Jeannie's lying on him too. But that's what she says happened. He's working on the boat case. And then the tragedy happens. And it worked. It's not the only reason, but it's part of the reason. The pressures on this man were unbearable, and they were all reaching a crescendo the day his wife and son were murdered by him. All on that day. And in the wake of this, everything changes. People stop asking about these things. The community has changed like you would expect. People are concerned, they're scared, they're worried. And everything's changed. The backlash from the boat case has gone away, and all of that has changed. And that's why Mark Tinsley thought his case was over. This may seem like, really? But who would understand that better than him? This is exactly the kind of work he did. His skills as a lawyer were understanding the emotional value of a case, understanding the sympathies of a case. If you have a sympathetic plaintiff and an unsympathetic defendant, that is, in the civil world, that's a big case. But if those get reversed, if those change, if all of a sudden your defendant is more sympathetic, it changes it. It changes the entirety of what Mark Tinsley's position on this case was for the Beach family, that Alec was going to have to pay money. And that's what he told you from the stand. He said the second, if Alec had been the victim of some unsuspect or some random vigilante, the entirety of the case has changed. And I'm not taking the same position. I'm not trying to demand that level of recovery. He gets the $750. Well, he gets $600 of it. Ultimately gets a $750 loan. He convinces Chris Wilson. That heads off to Ferris. That's pretty much the main thing he did after this, was to make sure he could get that money, enough of it to Chris Wilson, so that he would send an email to the law firm saying, hey, everything's cool, I got it. It's all good. And that's what the law firm thought. It's the main thing he did in the wake of the murders of his wife and son, was he made sure to stay, again, one step ahead of the game, because he had more time now. He had time he didn't have on June 7th, but he had it now. And that's the first thing he did. It's the first thing he did. It's the main thing he did, was keep the hamster wheel going. I know it seems like a lot, but you have to consider the unique circumstances of this particular man. This particular man who has proven over and over again that he will do anything to keep that hamster wheel going and to avoid accountability. And he's been doing it for over 10 years. He just finally reached a point that he had never reached before. Of course, the hearing on the motion to compel gets canceled. Who would go forward with that in the wake of what's happened? That goes away. Doesn't, I think you heard from the testimony up there, it doesn't get rescheduled till long after everything crashes and burns in September. It doesn't even get rescheduled in the wake of this. They don't have to worry about that either, and the potential that had for exposing who he was. Because the second somebody looks at his accounts, the second his own partner, Danny Henderson, looks at his accounts as in representing him and says, well, let me see him, he can't do that. He can't do that. He can't even show them to his own partner. Because what's going to happen? They're going to see it too. He can't let that happen, or everything falls apart. And and he loses everything, including that legacy that you heard from individuals up there, is so important to him, more important than anything. I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is the timeline. And you can see and I'll let y'all look at that, but you can see how this develops, how this hamster wheel continues, how he always has to be one step ahead of the game. You know, we've talked about the Redbeard and the Zero United. Those are the land deals that went bad. They get charged off, but you have Palmetto State Bank, still dealing with him. He then appoints Russell Lafitte a conservator and borrows up to $1 million from the Plyler girls' accounts without their knowledge. And then he has to steal money from the Badger case, where he's already making a huge amount of legal fees. He has to steal money from the Badger case to pay off the Plyler girls before they turn 18, and then there's an accounting for that. And then he opens up the Forge account, and it continues. $338,000 from Dion Martin, Johnny Bush, Manuel Sanders, and Richard, $225,000. He's maxing out $1 million line of credit. The only way to stay afloat is to beg, borrow, and steal. He's maxing out $1 million line of credit. He steals some more money, but he's right back to where he was. March of 2018, he's now maxed out not only $1 million line of credit, but also a $600,000 line of credit. A line of credit, almost like a credit card, maxed out. Then the boat crash happens, and look what happens to the figures. $3.7 million, $1.1 million, $1 million. And then you have the double homicide. This is some of the exhibits. This is, as you recall, there'll be the statements, and they're in evidence showing the defendant's assets on June 7th, 2021, and the reds are his liabilities. That one's green, but it's negative. And then over here, that's where he was a couple months later. He borrowed $750,000 and still ended up $347,000 in the hole, which part of that had to cover. I think it was called the most generous overdraft policy ever conceived. Because, I mean, in fairness, though, he did get a $5 overdraft charge right there. So, anyway. All right, what else do we have? Because we've talked about a lot of things about the finances, and I know that there's been a lot of that, but it's really the only way to understand all the things that were affecting this middle-aged, outwardly successful professional man who had all these pressures upon him, like no one had ever seen. Well, we've got the pills. He claims he's had a pill addiction for 20 years. But what does he say about that? He says it makes him paranoid. He says it makes him agitated. He says opiates give him energy. Use your common sense about that. But he also says, and he even said this in the telephone interview after the side of the road, that the withdrawals will make you do anything to get rid of them. That's common sense as well. We know how powerful opiates can be and how the addiction of opiates can be extremely powerful. The withdrawals, not being dope sick, can be extremely powerful. But he's also saying he's taking 1,000 milligrams a day. And he's trying to blame all his theft on that. But that's not what these records reflect. They reflect an insatiable desire for money and a hamster wheel that's been going on for a long time. And you don't really see the escalation from his drug dealer until March of 2021. I would ask you also, one of the tenets of juries is common sense. That's what you're here for, is for an individual and then a collective common sense. Common sense, 1,000 milligrams a day, does that sound survivable? He sat there on that stand and told you that's what he was taking. And as we're going to go through this process, we're going to talk about what he said on the stand and how many times on the fly that he looked you in your eyes and didn't tell you the truth. He's very good at it. His own partner said that. He's very, very good at it. I'll leave it to you to decide whether 1,000 milligrams a day is survivable with opiates. And if it was, that you could still engage in work, have a successful practice, and then on top of that, engage in these complex conspiracies to steal and fool everyone and live a life and have people outwardly think that you're, who you profess to be in public. If you were taking 1,000 milligrams a day, does that make common sense? I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't. I have no doubt that he was taking opiate pills. But I think he looked you, and I would submit to you to decide whether or not he looked you in the eye and claimed them out as inconsistent with whatever else we know about this man. That's really inconsistent with survivability as a matter of common sense. He can never function at the level he's been functioning, keeping up with these pressures, staying one step ahead for over a decade if he was taking that much dope. I would submit to you. Just one other lie that I would submit to you as a lie that he's trying to get you to believe, to feel sympathetic for him, as if the dope was the cause of the money and the cause of his issues, when the reality is it wasn't. This has been going on for a long time, and the finances prove differently. But what else about this? You've seen the interviews. And we're going to play some clips of these interviews, but I'm not going to play them all for you again. You've watched them. But if you have any questions, go back and watch them. He talks about being paranoid. Listen, watch those interviews when he's with Dave Owen. He doesn't look like he's withdrawing from any drugs. His responses are appropriate. He's not in displaying any paranoia. He's smooth. He's focused on the events. He's focused on trying to get information about the case from law enforcement officers, which is interesting in its own right. Why is he so focused on that? And in Savannah, where supposedly he was detoxing, he sat down, as you've heard the testimony, with a composite sketch artist and went through the whole process to come out with this picture, which I swear is not me. How do you do that? How do you do that if you're on that much dope? So why did he tell you that, ladies and gentlemen? Why did he look you in the eye and tell you that as he sat there on that stand trying to explain what was going on? It's interesting also that in one of the interviews with law enforcement, there were 3 interviews, June 8th, June 10th, and August 11th, before we get to the side of the road, that he mentions that Paul was a little detective. That's very interesting for him to mention that, because you heard from Marion Proctor, Maggie's sister, that Maggie called Paul that, the little detective, specifically in reference to Paul paying attention and trying to keep Alec from taking pills. Why would he bring that up? That's an interesting thing to bring up, because that was what that was in reference to. And what do we know? We know that in May, if we talk about all the pressures that are coming upon him, all these financial things that we've talked about, this exhausting hamster wheel that's been going on forever, the need to beg, borrow, and steal to stay one step ahead, and he's running out of options there. On top of that, we know in May that Paul sends a text to him saying, "Mom found some pills, we need to talk." Mom found some pills and we need to talk. Another pressure from Paul and Maggie on him. And if you look at the texts, the weekend of the ball game on June the 7th, and those are in evidence, Alec is not at the game. And he's texting back and forth, and Maggie's like, don't come if you feel bad. And he's like, well, I think I can get a late checkout. And then he's like, at 1 o'clock, they made me leave. I submit to you, it's a reasonable inference they were on him at this time. They were watching him like a hawk. Opiates, the most powerful of withdrawals. And everything's coming to a head, including this as well. Run out of money, running out of options, doesn't get paid in any significant way until December, already stole the fares fees and spent that money in 2 months, has an expensive pill habit, and accountability and consequences will undo everything in his life, everything that is his self-identity, everything, the only things that he cares about. He doesn't care about lying to his partners and his family and his friends and his clients if it will delay accountability for him. He'll do it in a heartbeat. And all of that is about to be undone.